This is recoil smoothing, and it allows you to have zero recoil with any gun. Today I'm going to teach you what recoil smoothing is, why recoil smoothing is easier on controller, and answer the most important question. Should you practice recoil patterns, or should you just recoil smooth? I'm Pesky Frank, and I'll answer every single one of those questions and change how you think about recoil control in Apex forever. But first, what is recoil smoothing? If you've ever shot at a wall like this, you know that every gun has a different recoil pattern. To get zero recoil, you need to counteract the gun's unique recoil pattern by doing the opposite of this shape by pulling down with your mouse or your right thumbstick. So that means you need to control your gun's recoil and track a target running across your screen. Well, that's actually wrong. Try and shoot a wall like this. If you move your crosshair fast enough to the side, you don't get any recoil from your gun. This is called recoil smoothing because your recoil smooths out. This means when you're tracking this dummy here, you don't need to pull down and counteract your gun's recoil, you only need to track the horizontal movement of the dummy. Now going back to this wall, if we move our crosshair horizontally too slowly, we don't activate recoil smoothing and we get recoil from our gun. This means that there is a minimum speed that you need to move your crosshair to activate recoil smoothing. Well, according to Tori, the player who originally discovered recoil smoothing,
as long as your crosshair is moving at about 3.74 degrees per second, you will not have recoil.
But how fast is 3.7 degrees per second? If you want to know how Tori found this, I have a step-by-step explanation in the description below. But you don't need to understand the math, you only need to understand two very important things about recoil smoothing. The closer you are to a target, the faster you need to move your crosshair to track your target. And the farther away you are from the target, the slower you need to move your crosshair. This means after a certain distance from the target, recoil smoothing will no longer activate. This range that recoil smoothing activates depends on the combination of two things, your movement speed and your target's movement speed. If both you and your target aren't moving, recoil smoothing will not activate because your crosshair isn't moving. So how do you activate recoil smoothing on a target that isn't moving? All you need to do is strafe to the left or to the right like this. When we strafe, we need to move our crosshair to track the target. This movement in our crosshair activates recoil smoothing because it's moving fast enough. Strafing like this to activate recoil smoothing is commonly referred to as recoil smoothing. So when you ADS with an assault rifle, your movement speed is 86.75 units per second, so you can recoil smooth up to 34 meters. But what if both you and your target are moving? Well, it depends on the direction your target's moving. If you and your target are both strafing in the same direction, this is called mirror strafing because you're mirroring your enemy's movement. But mirror strafing won't activate recoil smoothing because your crosshair isn't moving fast enough. So you need to strafe in the opposite direction your enemy is moving. This is called anti-mirroring because you're doing the opposite of your enemy's movement. If both you and your enemy are ADSing with flat lines and anti-mirroring each other's movement by strafing in opposite directions, this will increase the AR's recoil smoothing range to around 68 meters. When ADSing with an SMG, your movement speed is 147.5 units per second, so recoil smoothing will activate up to 56 meters. This chart right here shows the different ranges recoil smoothing will activate based on your movement speed and your target's movement speed. Also, if you could slap a like on this video because I had to do a lot of math to figure out these ranges and I hate it, so thank you. Now, just because you're inside these ranges doesn't mean recoil smoothing will automatically activate. The closer you get to the maximum recoil smoothing range, the more difficult it's going to be to consistently and smoothly move your crosshair at 3.7 degrees per second. This is especially true for SMGs because recoil smoothing can activate within 56 meters, but anything past 20 meters with an SMG is extremely difficult. Now this is the most important thing you can take away from this video. These ranges are just theoretical ranges that recoil smoothing can activate if you have perfect tracking under perfect circumstances. So what are the realistic recoil smoothing ranges where you can consistently recoil smooth? Well, it obviously depends on the skill of the player, but most players players can consistently recoil smooth within these ranges. 100% of the gunfights you take within these ranges, recoil smoothing will consistently activate. Quick little side note here, it's much easier to recoil smooth at longer ranges if you play on a lower FOV or if you have better optics such as a 3x or a 2x4, because the target appears much larger on your screen, making it much easier to smoothly track your target. Now, why should I practice recoil patterns if I can just recoil smooth? Anything past the realistic recoil smoothing range, the more likely you're going to get recoil from your gun. Recoil in Apex is on a spectrum from maximum weapon recoil to zero weapon recoil. On one end of the spectrum, we have zero recoil smoothing and your weapon's full recoil. But on the other side, we have 100% recoil smoothing and zero recoil from your weapon. And the gray area in the middle are the situations where recoil smoothing will inconsistently activate, sometimes giving you recoil from your gun. So you should practice both recoil control and recoil smoothing because they're two completely different skills. Recoil smoothing is your ability to track a moving target, while recoil control is your ability to react to any changes in your crosshair's position. I highly recommend two separate practice routines for both recoil control and recoil smoothing. To practice recoil smoothing, put the bots on strafe, run, and random, and anti-mirror the dummy by strafing back and forth. Grab an SMG and start practicing recoil smoothing at 5 meters, 10 meters, 15 meters, and so on until you reach 30 meters. Then move on to the assault rifles. Start at 5 meters and then keep backing up until you reach 30 meters. You should be able to recoil smooth with any gun anywhere within 30 meters of your target. Then, to practice recoil control, don't move and put the bots on standstill and try to counteract the weapon-specific recoil pattern. To practice recoil control with SMGs, stand still and shoot the bot at 30 meters and then again at 50 meters. Practicing recoil control with SMGs past 50 meters isn't really necessary since the chances of you taking a real gunfight past 50 meters in game is extremely unlikely. Then grab an AR and practice recoil control at 30 meters, 50 meters, 75, and 100 meters. Make sure you practice at these different ranges with iron sights and these 4 optics. And if you really want to master recoil control in Apex, turn the bots onto strafe speed, walk, and random, and practice anti-mirroring the dummy from 30 meters up to around 68 meters, since this is the maximum distance recoil smoothing will activate in this situation. Then, anything past 68 meters, you should mirror the dummy's strafe and practice recoil control. We want to mirror the dummy past 68 meters because even if we anti-mirror, our crosshair isn't moving fast enough to activate recoil smoothing. In game, anytime we take a gunfight past 68 meters with an assault rifle, we want to mirror the enemy to make tracking easier. This way, you can use your movement and your own body to adjust for the enemy's horizontal movement, which allows you to focus only on recoil control with your mouse or your right thumbstick. If you follow both of these practice routines, you're going to be prepared for every single gunfight you'll ever experience in Apex Legends. These practice routines are exactly what pros do in every single situation. Now, finally, how do controller players have an advantage when it comes to recoil smoothing? On controller, to move your crosshair at 3.7 degrees per second, all you need to do is move your right thumbstick far enough to the side and just leave it there. But with a mouse, you need to keep moving your entire forearm and wrist at the same speed. This is much harder with a mouse because you need to consider all the things that can restrict your range of motion. The height of your chair, the height of your desk, if your cat is sitting on your mouse pad or not. Now, I'm not saying controller is OP, all I'm saying is recoil smoothing is objectively much easier on controller, but M&K players can tap strafe, so it kinda evens out in the end anyways. And that's everything. If you learned anything at all today, make sure you leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to see future videos just like this one. If you want to learn some recoil patterns for different guns, click on this playlist right around here, and if you want to see the best movement tech tutorials on YouTube, click on the other playlist right around here somewhere.